She arrived at Belcourt Palace as a bride bought with her family's last hope, only to be told on her wedding night that she would never truly be his wife. But in a house haunted by locked doors, whispered tragedies, and a grief that had frozen the Marquis's heart for 8 years, she would do something no one expected, something that would shatter every wall he had built. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We did love to hear from you. If you enjoy Victorian-era tale stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. France, 1784. The carriage wheels creaked over the ancient stone road as Lady Kimberly Potter pressed her gloved hand against the rain-streaked window, watching the French countryside blur into mist and shadow. The rhythmic clatter of hooves matched the pounding of her heart, steady, relentless, inevitable. Her fingers worried at the edge of her traveling cloak, a deep burgundy silk purchased with the very last coins from her mother's jewelry box, now pawned to afford even this much dignity. "We are nearly to Belcourt, my lady," Eleanor murmured from the opposite bench, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the wheels. Kimberly nodded, but couldn't bring herself to speak. The words felt trapped somewhere between her chest and throat, tangled with fear and fury, and something she refused to name. The carriage rounded a bend, and suddenly the trees parted to reveal it, Belcourt Palace, rising from the valley like something out of a fever dream. Chandeliers blazed behind towering windows. Marble columns gleamed even in the twilight. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. In less than an hour, she would meet the man who had bought her, not with affection, not with courtship, but with a marriage contract signed across 2 countries to rescue her family from absolute ruin. Marquis André Pinard, one of the most powerful lords in the court of Louis XVI, a man whose name was spoken with reverence and fear in equal measure. Cold, unreachable, a legend wrapped in titles and tragedy, the Potter estate was gone. Her father had passed away in scandal, his debts so staggering they'd stripped the family of every acre, every heirloom, every shred of reputation. Her mother lay bedridden in a rented room in Dover, coughing dangerously into handkerchiefs they could no longer afford to replace. This marriage, this arrangement, was the only thing standing between Kimberly and watching her mother pass away in a workhouse. "Is it wrong, Eleanor?" Kimberly whispered, her breath fogging the glass, "to feel like I'm being delivered to my own execution?" Eleanor's kind, weathered face softened. She'd been with Kimberly since childhood, through laughter and ruin alike, and was now the only family Kimberly had left on this side of the Channel. "You're saving your mother's life, my lady. That's courage, not cowardice." "Courage," Kimberly echoed, her voice hollow. She watched the palace loom closer, its windows like unblinking eyes. They have a prettier word for it in France, I'm sure. The carriage rolled beneath the iron gates of Belcourt, and Kimberly straightened her spine, smoothed her skirts, and prepared to meet the man who had vowed, before ever laying eyes on her, that she would never be his wife in anything but name. She had no idea that within these glittering walls lay secrets that would break her, and a love that would remake them both. The first week at Belcourt passed like a slow death by 1,000 cuts. Kimberly learned quickly that being Marchioness in title meant nothing when the entire household had already decided she didn't belong. Servants moved past her in the corridors with lowered eyes and tight lips. When she asked for tea, it arrived cold. When she requested a tour of the estate, she was told the Marquis had not given permission. Every door she approached seemed to close just before she reached it. She was a ghost in her own home. The aristocracy was worse. At the first formal dinner she attended, a gathering of Parisian elite dripping in jewels and condescension, Kimberly overheard the whispers that weren't meant to be whispers at all. Poor André, shackled to that English creature. Bought her with a marriage contract, I hear. The family was destitute. She'll be gone by winter. Mark my words. Kimberly sat through 5 courses with her spine straight and her smile fixed, even as humiliation burned in her throat like swallowed glass. But it was Countess Celeste Beaumont who delivered the sharpest object. Celeste arrived at Bellecour 3 days after the wedding, sweeping into the drawing room in a gown of midnight blue silk, her dark hair piled in elaborate curls, her smile as beautiful and venomous as oleander. She was everything Kimberly was not, French, elegant, at ease in this world of power and perfume. "So you're the new Marchioness," Celeste said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. She circled Kimberly slowly, appraising. How quaint. André always did have a weakness for charity cases. Kimberly's hands clenched in her skirts. "I wasn't aware the Marquis required your opinion on his choices, Countess." Celeste's smile sharpened. "Oh, darling, I've known André since we were children. I was meant to stand where you're standing now." Her eyes glittered. "But don't worry, he'll tire of this political charade soon enough." She swept out, leaving only the scent of roses and the sting of a threat. Kimberly tried, repeatedly, to speak with André. She sought him in his study, in the library, in the gardens at dawn. But every encounter was the same: distant politeness, surface pleasantries, walls of ice that never cracked. "Good morning, Marchioness. I trust you slept well. The weather is fine today, is it not? If you'll excuse me, I have business in Paris." He was a stranger, a beautifully controlled, utterly unreachable stranger. By the 8th night, Kimberly lay awake in her vast, cold bed, staring at the canopy above, wondering if she would spend the rest of her life trapped in this gilded prison. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within the palace. Kimberly rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and followed the sound through darkened corridors until she reached the eastern wing, the part of Bellecour no one ever spoke of. The hallway ended at a pair of towering doors, sealed with iron locks and thick with dust. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against her ears. The next morning, Kimberly asked the housekeeper about the east wing. The woman's face went pale. "We do not speak of that place, my lady." "But I heard." "You heard nothing." The housekeeper's voice was firm, final, and if you're wise, you'll forget you ever asked. Kimberly watched her hurry away and knew with cold certainty whatever haunted Bellecour was locked behind those doors. Kimberly couldn't stop thinking about those footsteps. For 3 days, she tried to dismiss them as imagination, as exhaustion, as the creaking of an old palace settling into night. But every evening, as darkness crept through Bellecour's corridors, she found herself drawn back to that sealed hallway, staring at those iron-locked doors. On the 4th day, she decided to explore. The palace was a labyrinth. Kimberly wandered through forgotten galleries and abandoned sitting rooms, each more opulent and lifeless than the last. Servants had clearly been ordered to keep these spaces pristine but untouched. Furniture draped in white sheets like shrouded corpses, portraits veiled in cloth, chandeliers dark and silent. It was in a small, circular room overlooking the gardens that she found it. A portrait. The covering had slipped, revealing a young woman with dark, luminous eyes, and a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth Bellecour now lacked. She wore a gown of pale lavender, and around her neck hung a delicate pendant shaped like a bird in flight. The painting radiated life, joy, everything this palace had forgotten. A brass plaque at the bottom read, "Marianne Elise Pinard, 1760-1776. Kimberly's breath caught. 16 years old, just a girl. "You shouldn't be here, my lady." Kimberly spun to find Bertrand, the elderly butler, standing in the doorway. His face was drawn, his hands trembling slightly. "Who was she?" Kimberly asked. though she already knew the answer in her bones. The Marquis's sister. His voice was barely a whisper. Lady Marianne. She died young. Tragically. Bertrand's eyes flickered to the portrait, then away, as if the sight pained him. It destroyed him. He sealed this entire wing the day after her funeral. No one has entered these rooms in 8 years. What happened to her? Her ladyship's name is not spoken in these halls. The warning was gentle but absolute. The Marquis forbids it, and if you value your place here, you will not ask again. But Kimberly couldn't let it go. Over the following days, she pieced together fragments from the few servants who pitied her enough to whisper in shadows. Marianne had been beloved, by the staff, by the court, by André most of all. She was his only family after their parents' deaths, the light in his world. Then, suddenly, she fell ill. Within days, she was gone. André had been away on diplomatic business in Versailles when it happened. He returned to find his sister dead and the palace already draped in black. Some said it was fever, others murmured darker things. Toxic substance, betrayal, secrets buried with her body, but no one knew the truth. André never spoke of it, never allowed her name to be uttered, never entered the East Wing again. He had locked away his grief as thoroughly as he'd locked away her rooms. And Kimberly finally understood. The coldness, the distance, the vow that she would never be his wife in truth. André wasn't cruel. He was shattered. That night, Kimberly stood before the sealed doors of the East Wing. Her palm pressed against the ancient wood, and felt the weight of a grief so profound it had turned a man to stone. Behind these doors lay the ghost that haunted Bellecour. And until that ghost was laid to rest, André's heart would remain locked away forever. Celeste found Kimberly in the rose garden on a grey afternoon, when the sky threatened rain and the air smelled of earth and decay. "How quaint," the Countess said, appearing like a shadow in silk. "Playing at being mistress of the estate. Do you actually believe the roses care who tends them?" Kimberly straightened, setting down her pruning shears with deliberate calm. "Good afternoon, Countess. I didn't realize the gardens required your supervision." Celeste's laugh was like crystal shattering. She moved closer, circling Kimberly with the precision of a predator. "Let me save you some time, ma chère. I've known André since we were children. Our families spent every summer together at Versailles. I was there when Marianne passed away. I held him while he wept." The words landed like blows. Kimberly kept her expression neutral, but her hands clenched at her sides. "How lovely for you both," Kimberly said evenly. "You don't understand, do you?" Celeste's voice dropped to something softer, more dangerous. "You were a transaction, a political convenience to secure English trade agreements. André will never give you the heart he lost. It died with Marianne 8 years ago, and he blames himself for every moment of it." Blames himself? Kimberly couldn't stop the question. Celeste smiled, slow and satisfied. He was away when she needed him most. When she was... She paused delicately. "Taken from us. There are some who say her death was no accident, and André knows it. He carries that guilt like a chain around his neck." The implication hung in the air, toxic and deliberate. "Why are you telling me this?" Kimberly asked. "Because you're standing in a battlefield you don't understand, playing a game you cannot win." Celeste leaned closer, her perfume overwhelming. "Be a good little English bride. Accept your allowance. Live quietly, and perhaps André will let you keep the title when he eventually seeks an annulment." She swept away, leaving Kimberly alone among the dying roses. That evening's dinner was a spectacle of French aristocracy, 30 guests glittering with diamonds and malice. Kimberly sat beside André, who acknowledged her with nothing more than a polite nod before engaging the ambassador to his left in conversation. Midway through the fourth course, the Baron de Montfort raised his glass. "A toast to our dear Marquis," he announced, his voice carrying across the table, "who has finally secured the English alliance his father could not, through the most economical means possible." Laughter rippled through the guests. Kimberly felt every eye turn toward her, waiting for her to crumble. Andre's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Kimberly set down her fork with perfect composure. "How fortunate for France," she said clearly, "that the Marquis possesses both the political acumen and the financial restraint his peers so clearly lack. Though I'm certain the Baron's own estate management provides a different example." Silence. The Baron's face reddened. His gambling debts were legendary. "Perhaps," Kimberly continued, her smile serene, "economies are only embarrassing to those who've forgotten how to practice them." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the ambassador laughed, genuine, delighted, and raised his glass. "To the Marchioness. Sharp as any Frenchwoman." The table erupted in reluctant approval. Even Celeste's smile had frozen at the edges. Kimberly glanced at Andre. His eyes were on her, unreadable as always, but something had shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not quite, but recognition. She had drawn something dangerous, and in this palace of whispers and venom, that was its own kind of victory. The morning after the dinner, Kimberly made a decision. She would stop waiting for permission to exist in her own home. She started with Marianne's garden, the one she discovered beyond the east wing, overgrown with 8 years of neglect. Roses had gone wild, climbing over statues and choking pathways. Hedges sprawled untamed. But beneath the chaos, Kimberly could see what it had been. A sanctuary, carefully designed, lovingly tended. She rolled up her sleeves and began. At first, the servants watched from windows, uncertain. An English bride playing in the dirt was scandal enough. But when Kimberly worked through the afternoon without complaint, her hands blistered and her gown mud-stained, something shifted. Old Marie, the head gardener's widow, appeared with pruning shears. "Lady Marianne planted those roses herself," she said quietly, kneeling beside Kimberly, "from cuttings she brought from Paris. She would have hated seeing them like this." "Then let's bring them back," Kimberly said. Marie's eyes filled with tears. "You remind me of her, my lady. She never acted above the work either." Over the following weeks, Kimberly learned everything the servants had been forbidden to speak of. Marianne had been the heart of Belcourt, kind to every maid, gentle with every stable boy, beloved in ways the aristocracy never understood. She'd taught the cook's daughter to read. She'd convinced Andre to improve the servants' quarters. She'd filled the palace with music and laughter. The Marquis was different then. Bertram confided one afternoon as Kimberly organized the library, another of Marianne's abandoned projects. He smiled. He trusted people. And then she died, Kimberly finished softly. "She fell ill at a court dinner," Bertrand said, his voice heavy. "Violently ill. Within hours, she couldn't breathe. The physicians said it was her heart, but—" He hesitated. Lady Marianne was 16 and healthy. She'd been dancing that very evening. It was too sudden, too convenient for certain people who'd argued with her earlier that week. Who argued with her? But Bertrand shook his head. "Some questions are too dangerous, my lady. Even now." Kimberly didn't press, but she filed the information away like a piece of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. The servants began to change toward her. They brought her tea without being asked. They smiled when she passed. They started calling her our Marchioness instead of the English bride. Even Celeste noticed. "Playing the people's princess?" she sneered when she found Kimberly arranging flowers in the main hall. Marianne's flowers, from Marianne's garden. "How pedestrian." "How necessary," Kimberly replied, not looking up. Someone had to remember her. Celeste's face paled with rage, and she swept away without another word. But it was Andre's reaction that shook Kimberly most. She was leaving the garden one evening, her arms full of cut roses, when she found him standing at the window of his study, watching. His hand was pressed against the glass, his expression something she'd never seen before. Vulnerable, lost, uncertain. For a long moment their eyes met. Then Andre turned away, disappearing into shadow. But Kimberly had seen it. The crack in his armor, the flicker of something human beneath the ice. He had noticed, and for the first time since arriving at Belcourt, Kimberly felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The Marquis was not as unreachable as he pretended to be. The summons from Versailles arrived on a cold October morning, sealed with a royal crest and heavy with implication. Andre was called to negotiate new trade terms, a delicate dance of power that could secure Belcourt's influence or destroy it entirely. The palace bristled with tension. Advisors arrived in carriages, documents piled on Andre's desk, and through it all, Celeste moved like smoke, whispering in ears, planting doubt. Kimberly overheard fragments in hallways. The English bride has no understanding of French politics. Andre's judgment has been compromised since the marriage. Perhaps the alliance was a mistake after all. The court was turning, and Celeste was orchestrating every note. On the third night, Kimberly found Andre alone in his study, surrounded by maps and correspondence, his face haggard with exhaustion. "You should rest," she said from the doorway. "I didn't ask for your concern." His voice was flat, dismissive. Something inside Kimberly snapped. "Then what did you ask for when you married me?" She stepped into the room, her hands trembling. "You brought me here. You gave me your name. You made me Marchioness of this palace, and then you act as if I'm a ghost haunting your halls. This conversation is inappropriate. Everything about this marriage is inappropriate." The words burst from her like a flood finally breaking through a dam. "Why did you marry me at all if you despise my presence so thoroughly? What are you running from? What are you protecting?" Andre rose from his chair, his control fracturing. "You know nothing of what I'm protecting." "Then tell me." Kimberly moved closer, her voice breaking. "I'm your wife, Andre. Not in the way you want, perhaps, but in the way the world recognizes. I have a right to understand. You have no right to anything." The roar filled the study. Andre's fist slammed onto the desk, scattering papers. "Love destroys everything it touches. It destroyed Marianne. It destroyed me. I will never let it destroy me again." The silence that followed was deafening. Andre stood breathing hard, his mask finally shattered, and Kimberly saw what lay beneath. Not cruelty, but devastation. A man so wounded by loss that he'd built walls of ice just to survive. "I'm not asking you to love me," Kimberly whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm asking you to stop punishing me for being alive when she isn't." Andre turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Leave." "Andre, leave." Kimberly fled. Hours later, Kimberly lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling when she heard the commotion. Shouting, running footsteps. Bertrand's voice, panicked. "Send for the physician. Now." She ran into the corridor to find servants rushing toward Andre's chambers. "What's happened?" "The Marquis," a young maid gasped. "He collapsed. They found him on the study floor. He's burning with fever." Kimberly's heart went cold. She pushed through the crowd to find Andre on his bed, barely conscious, his skin pale and slick with sweat. The physician was already examining him, his face grim. "What is it?" Kimberly demanded. "Toxic substance," the physician said quietly. "Or something very like it. I've seen this before. Sudden, violent. If we can't break the fever." He didn't finish the sentence. But Kimberly understood. Andre was dying, and someone in this palace had made certain of it. By dawn, the physician's prognosis was dire. "The fever is too high. If it doesn't break within 3 days, Dr. Moreau's voice trailed into meaningful silence. And given the possibility of contagion, I must advise that contact be limited to essential staff only. Within hours, the palace emptied like water through a sieve. Servants who'd worked at Bellecour for decades suddenly remembered family emergencies. Maids refused to enter André's chambers. Even Bertrand, loyal for 30 years, stood at the doorway wringing his hands but unable to cross the threshold. "Forgive me, my lady," he whispered, shame etched in every line of his face. "I have grandchildren. If it's plague, it's not plague," Kimberly said quietly. "It's toxic substance, and I need clean linens, broth, and cold water. Can you leave them outside the door?" Bertrand nodded, grateful to be released from his cowardice. Only Kimberly remained. She stripped off her day dress and rolled up her sleeves, moving through the sick room with methodical determination. André thrashed in fever-soaked sheets, his skin burning to the touch, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Marianne," he moaned, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Kimberly wrung out a cool cloth and pressed it to his forehead. "Shh, save your strength." But the fever had him in its grip, and the words poured out like toxic substance from a reopened wound. "I should have been there," André whispered, his eyes wild and unseeing. "The dinner at Versailles. I left her alone. She told me she didn't trust them. She begged me to stay, but I went anyway." Kimberly's hands stilled. "André, the wine was toxic. They said it was her heart, but I knew." Knew. His fingers clutched at empty air. "Celeste warned me after. Told me Marianne had been asking questions, making accusations about funds, about corruption. She'd become dangerous to people at court." The name fell like a stone into dark water. "Celeste. She said it was an accident," André continued, tears streaming down his fever-bright face. "But accidents don't silence inconvenient girls. I couldn't prove it. I had no evidence. So I sealed the wing, locked away everything, swore I'd never love again because love—" His voice broke. "Love only gives them weapons to destroy you." Kimberly pressed her hand over her mouth, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. For 3 days and nights, she didn't leave his side. She fed him broth when he could swallow, changed his linens when the fever drenched them, held his hand when the nightmares came, whispered reassurances he couldn't hear. Eleanor appeared once at the door, begging her to rest. "You'll fall ill yourself, my lady." "Then I'll fall ill," Kimberly said simply. "I won't leave him." On the 3rd night, when the fever finally crested and André's breathing steadied into something approaching sleep, Kimberly collapsed into the chair beside his bed. Her hand still clutched his. She didn't know if he would survive. Didn't know if he would remember anything he'd confessed. Didn't know if saving his life would change anything between them. But she knew one truth with absolute certainty. She loved him. Not the cold stranger who dismissed her. Not the legend whispered about in courts, but the broken man beneath. The one who'd loved his sister so fiercely that losing her had shattered his soul. And she would not let him pass away alone. Dawn broke over Bellecour like a whispered promise. André's eyes opened slowly, the fever fog lifting to reveal a ceiling he recognized. His own chambers, pale morning light filtering through curtains. His body ached as though he'd been trampled by horses, and his throat felt raw as sandpaper. But he was alive, and someone was holding his hand. He turned his head carefully and found her, Kimberly, asleep in the chair beside his bed, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale with exhaustion. Her fingers were laced through his, as if even in sleep she refused to let go. His chest tightened with something he'd forgotten how to name. "My wife," he whispered. The words felt foreign on his tongue, but for the first time, they felt true. Kimberly stirred at the sound, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she simply stared at him, as if afraid he might be a fever dream. Then tears spilled down her cheeks. "You're awake," she breathed. "Thank God, you're awake." "How long?" "3 days." Her voice cracked. "The physician said he wasn't certain you'd... You stayed." It wasn't a question. "Of course I stayed." She squeezed his hand tighter, half laughing, half sobbing. "You're my husband, you insufferable man. Where else would I be?" Something broke open inside Andre's chest. 8 years of ice, melting all at once. 2 days later, when Andre could finally stand without collapsing, he found Kimberly in the library. "Come with me," he said quietly. She looked up, startled. "Where?" "Somewhere I should have taken you weeks ago." He led her through the corridors to the east wing, and Kimberly's breath caught as he produced a key from his pocket, an old iron key, tarnished with disuse. The locks turned with a groan of protest. The doors opened. Dust motes danced in the sudden flood of light, illuminating rooms frozen in time. Marianne's sitting room, her writing desk still scattered with half-finished letters. Her bedchamber, the lavender gown from the portrait draped across a chair, as if she'd just stepped out. And there, above the mantel, the portrait itself. Marianne, smiling, alive. "She was everything good in my life," Andre said, his voice rough. "And when I lost her, I thought I'd lost everything. I blamed myself for leaving, for not protecting her, for not seeing the danger until it was too late." Kimberly took his hand. "You told me, during the fever, about the toxic substance, about Celeste." Andre's jaw tightened. "Celeste has been weaving her web for years. She wanted to be Marchioness, has always wanted it. Marianne discovered financial improprieties, connections to corrupt officials at Versailles. Celeste couldn't allow that to come to light." He turned to Kimberly, his eyes burning with intensity. "And now she's tried again. The tea I drank that night, it came from her gift basket. We have to expose her. We will." Andre cupped Kimberly's face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "But first, I need to tell you something I should have said the day you arrived." He took a breath, as if steadying himself before a leap. "I was wrong, about everything. I married you believing I could keep you at arm's length, that I could prevent myself from caring. But you..." His voice broke. "You stayed when everyone else fled. You brought life back to this tomb. You loved me before I deserved it." "Andre, let me finish." His hands trembled. "I choose you, Kimberly. Not out of obligation, not for politics. I choose you because you are brave and stubborn and impossibly kind. Because you've shown me that love doesn't destroy, fear does." Tears streamed down Kimberly's face as Andre leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "Will you be my wife?" he whispered. "In truth, not only in name." "Yes," she breathed, 1,000 times yes. And in the room where Marianne once smiled, surrounded by memories of love lost and found again, Andre kissed his wife for the very first time. The transformation of Bellecour began the morning after Andre's confession. Kimberly descended the grand staircase at dawn to find the entire household staff assembled in the entrance hall, waiting, not with the cold indifference she'd endured for weeks, but with something new in their faces. Respect. Bertrand stepped forward, bowing deeply. "My lady, we failed you when the Marquis fell ill. We abandoned him when he needed us most, but you..." His voice wavered. "You showed us what true nobility looks like. Command us, and we will follow." Kimberly's throat tightened. "Then help me restore this house. Not to what it was, but to what it should have been all along." One by one they nodded. The palace awakened like a body remembering how to breathe. Windows were thrown open, dust cloths were removed, music returned to the halls, and at the center of it all stood Kimberly, no longer the unwanted English bride, but the Marchioness of Bellecour in every sense that mattered. When André announced he would bring Kimberly to Versailles as his partner in negotiations, the court buzzed with speculation. But when they arrived, Kimberly in a gown of deep crimson silk, her hand firmly clasped in André's, the whispers died. She was magnificent. She navigated political conversations with precision, deflected insults with grace, and stood beside André not as decoration, but as his equal. Ambassadors who'd dismissed her weeks ago now sought her counsel. Even the king remarked to André, "Your Marchioness has quite the strategic mind." But it was Celeste's reaction that revealed everything. The Countess appeared at a soiree, her smile brittle as glass. "How delightful to see the happy couple," she said, venom dripping from every syllable. "Though I wonder, André, if your wife knows the full history of Bellecour's tragedies." "She knows everything," André said coldly, "including who orchestrated them." Celeste's mask slipped for just a moment, fear flickering across her face. "The tea you sent," Kimberly said quietly, stepping forward. "The same blend Marianne drank the night she passed away. We've had it tested. Digitalis. Enough to stop a heart or induce fatal fever. You have no proof. We have your correspondence." André's voice was ice. "Letters to your associates at Versailles. Instructions regarding Marianne's inconvenient questions. Payments made from your accounts to certain physicians who signed false death certificates." Celeste's face drained of color. "You will leave France," André continued, "tonight. If you ever return, I will ensure every court in Europe knows exactly what you've done. This is the only mercy you'll receive." For a long moment, Celeste stared at them, the woman who'd lost and the man who'd finally chosen. Then she turned and fled, her empire of whispers collapsing behind her. 6 months later, Kimberly stood in the East Wing, no longer sealed, no longer silent. Marianne's rooms had been transformed into a music conservatory, where servants' children came to learn piano and violin. The garden beyond bloomed with roses planted by both sisters, one living, one remembered. André found her there at sunset, slipping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her hair. "That Marianne would have liked this," Kimberly said softly. "Life instead of mourning. Joy instead of silence. She would have liked you." André turned her to face him, his eyes, once so cold, now warm with something that made her heart soar. "My brave, impossible wife, who refused to let me hide forever." "Our wife," Kimberly corrected with a smile, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. André's breath caught. "Truly?" "Truly." He kissed her then, deep and tender, as piano music drifted through the open windows and roses perfumed the evening air. Bellecour had been a tomb for 8 years. But now it was a home, and the Marquis who'd sworn never to love again had discovered something far more powerful than grief. He had learned to live. Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone close to you. Your support inspires us to keep creating stories filled with love, healing, and unforgettable twists.